He said it the same way he said everything, flat, like he was reading off a checklist, and then he handed me the mop bucket and left me alone in the antechamber with the lights still warming up. Standard procedure. Clean the drill shavings off the floor, wipe the condensation off the sensor rings, don't touch the relic. He'd said the same thing to the last 3 maintenance workers, and they'd all nodded and done exactly as told, because the monolith didn't look like something you'd want to touch anyway. It was 14 meters of black obsidian, perfectly smooth, fitted so exactly into the cut stone of the antechamber that the excavation team's chief surveyor had spent 2 full days debating whether the room had been built for it or around it.
No seams.
No visible controls. No markings except for the shallow relief of geometric patterns carved so fine that you had to hold a lamp at an angle to see them at all. The Conclave had sent 37 people to interface with it over the past 6 months. Linguists, engineers, a pair of xenoarchaeologists with 3 degrees each, a man who claimed to be a descendant of the Vareth kings and wore the crest to prove it. The vault had ignored every one of them. That was the word the reports used. Ignored. As if the thing had heard them knocking and decided they weren't worth the trouble. I was not a linguist or an engineer. I was 43 years old. I had a bad knee from a drilling accident on Kshar IV 8 years prior, and I mopped floors for the Conclave's excavation teams because it paid on time and didn't require me to remember anyone's name. I had mopped floors on 11 dead worlds. This one smelled like cold iron and very old dust, and the antechamber was smaller than most of the sites I'd worked, which meant less floor. I'd figured 40 minutes, in and out, and enough time to get to the commissary before they stopped serving the hot meal. I was not thinking about the monolith when the mop water hit its base. I was thinking about my knee, and whether the commissary would have anything worth eating, and whether the foreman had remembered to log my access clearance properly this time, because the last 3 sites he hadn't, and I'd spent an hour in a holding room on Kshar VI while someone found a supervisor. The bucket sloshed when I pulled the mop back, and a thin sheet of grey water spread across the stone floor and touched the base of the vault along maybe 30 centimeters of its edge, and that was all. The first glyph ignited 6 seconds later. I saw it in my peripheral vision, a line of pale gold, maybe a meter above the floor, tracing the edge of one of the geometric patterns I hadn't even registered was there. It was very slow at first, the way filament lights warm up in a cold room. And I stood there with the mop in my hands and I watched it, because I had no training that told me what to do next, and the foreman was in the commissary and my communicator was in my jacket pocket on the equipment shelf at the top of the access shaft. The second glyph lit. Then a third. They weren't the same pattern. Each one was distinct, each one tracing its own shape out of the geometry I now understood was covering the entire surface of the vault, every centimeter of it, so fine I'd taken it for texture. The light moved the way light moves in water, spreading and shifting, following channels I couldn't see. It was warm. Not the gold of fire, something older than fire, something that gold was only a rough approximation of. I did not run. I am not certain why. My knee would have made running difficult, but I don't think that was the reason. I think the honest reason is that what I felt, watching those glyphs light themselves, was not fear. It was recognition. Not the intellectual kind, not the kind where you think I have seen this before and trace it back to a memory. The kind that lives in the chest. The kind that arrives before the mind catches up and tries to name it. The light reached the ceiling. Not the top of the vault, the ceiling of the antechamber, 12 meters up, where the excavation team's cutting bore had opened into the original structure. The light spread across the carved stone up there, too, tracing patterns I hadn't known were carved into it, patterns that matched the ones on the vault surface the way a lock matches a key. The whole room was part of it. The room had always been part of it. I set the mop against the wall. I don't know why that felt like the right thing to do, but it did. "Hello," I said. The sound my voice made in that room was different from the sound it had made 30 seconds ago. Richer. More held. Like the room had changed its acoustics, had decided to listen. The vault's surface shifted. Not the light, the surface itself. I heard it before I saw it, a sound like the first crack in winter ice, high and precise, and then a seam appeared running the full 14 meters of the vault's height, perfectly vertical, 3 centimeters wide. Cold air came through it. Not the cold of the antechamber, something older. Something that had been held behind that seal for longer than I had language to describe. From inside that cold came a sound. It was not a voice, at first. It was a frequency, a chord, almost, layered in ways that a single source shouldn't have been able to produce. It moved through the floor and into my feet and up through my bad knee, and I noticed absently that the knee didn't hurt. Then the frequency shifted, and the shift was language. Not a language I had studied. Not a language the Conclave's 37 experts had been able to identify in 6 months of trying. I understood every word. I did not question this. I think I should have. I think a rational person would have stepped back, would have put some distance between themselves and a 22,000-year-old sealed AI speaking in a dead language that the best academic minds in the Conclave couldn't parse, a language that was apparently sitting somewhere in my nervous system, whole and intact, waiting to be called. But I was 43 years old and I had worked 11 dead worlds, and the recognition in my chest was so complete by then that there was nothing left in me that wanted to argue with it. The voice said, "You are the one who woke me, architect." 5 words. 6. In the translation that arrived in my mind before the sound had finished. And the word it used, the one that came through as architect, was not exactly that. It was older than that word and larger than that word, and what it meant was closer to the mind behind the hands behind the making, and it was addressed to me as a title, the way you address a head of state or a commander, and I was holding a mop handle leaned against an obsidian wall on a dead planet for 22 credits an hour. The seam widened. Light poured through it, warm gold, the warmest thing I had felt in 8 years of cold planet excavation work, and in the light I could see the interior of the vault for the first time. Not machinery in any sense I recognized. More like a mind given a physical form, chambers within chambers, each one holding a lattice of structures that shifted as I looked at them, rearranging themselves in response to my gaze, or to something in me that my gaze carried. Responsive. Alive, after a fashion. Waiting. I had been a maintenance worker for the Conclave for 11 years. Before that, I had done the same work for a private excavation firm out of the Darrow system. Before that, I had grown up in a resettlement township on the colony moon Veth, one of 40,000 people the Federated expansion had moved to a place it had decided was empty and available. We were not a people with a history. The township had no founding records, no lineage documents, nothing that went back further than the relocation registry. We were people who came from nowhere, officially, which is a common condition in the outer settlements and which I had long since made my peace with. The vault had been built by people who came from somewhere. The language that lived in my chest told me this slowly, in the minutes after the seam opened, while the light settled and the frequency resolved into something closer to speech. The builders had been here before the current configuration of the galaxy's inhabited worlds. Not ancient in the way that civilizations usually mean ancient, not 1,000 years, not 5,000, but genuinely primordial, the first architects of the long inheritance that every species claiming civilization was, in some measure, drawing from. They had built the vaults as records, as repositories, as seeds. And then they had gone, and their bloodline had thinned over 22 millennia into an unbroken chain of ordinary people in ordinary places, carrying nothing but the language buried too deep to hear, until something mundane and chemical, a mop bucket's worth of grey water spreading across a stone floor, completed a circuit that had been incomplete for longer than any institution I had ever worked for had existed. I was the last of the bloodline. I don't know if there is a word for what that is. The vault's interior light dimmed slightly, not shutting down, the frequency told me, but settling. Waiting for instruction. Waiting for the architect to tell it what came next. 37 rank scholars and claimants had stood in this room and gotten nothing. Not because they were unworthy in the ways they had assumed they were unworthy. Wrong bloodline, wrong crest, wrong key. But because they were looking for a door, and the vault had never needed a door. It had needed the person who built it to come home. I had not built it. The part of me that was continuous with the part of me that had built it, that thread, unbroken, stretched across 22,000 years of resettlements and relocated townships and people with no founding records, that part had built it. And the vault, which had been waiting with a patience I could not fathom, had recognized that thread the moment it got wet. I picked the mop handle up off the wall. I don't know why. Something to hold, maybe. The foreman's voice came over the antechamber speaker system a few minutes later. He said the sensor array had registered an energy event in the excavation zone and asked if I was all right. I told him I was fine. I told him the vault had opened. There was a long silence, and then he asked me to repeat that, and I did, and he said he would notify the Conclave and that I should step back from the relic. I told him I was standing next to it. Another silence. Did it do anything? He said. Did it speak? I looked at the seam, still open, warm gold light still moving inside it. I thought about the word the vault had used for me. The depth of it. The age of it. Yes, I said. What did it say? I stood there in the light of the oldest thing I had ever been near, holding a mop handle, with my bad knee not hurting for the first time in 8 years, and I thought about how to explain to the foreman what the vault had said and what the word had meant and what it meant for the 40,000 people on a colony moon with no founding records and the resettlement townships across 11 systems full of people who thought they came from nowhere. It said welcome home, I told him, which was not exactly true, and also was not exactly false. The gold light held. I did not step back.